Well, good evening, Forest Mill. It's another Wednesday evening. I'm glad you could join us, and I'm really looking forward to our time of Bible study. I know it's been a wild week with the weather and um, uncertainty about when we can meet again. There's a lot of things that are still up in the air. I will tell you that our elders are diligently working towards that end. We are uh, looking forward to being together as much or more than anyone. It is a big part of our daily lives to be a part of a body of Christ that's able to see one another and be together. So this has been difficult, I know, for many of you, and as it's been for us. And I'm looking forward to that time. But until then, we're going to make do and share our time together in Bible study here and on Sunday mornings as well when we have our time of worship. But it is interesting to me as I've been chatting and hearing from you on Facebook and Messenger and texting and all of the opportunities that Forest Mill has been granted to reach out to family and to friends. I've talked with a couple today who were saying that their family was able to watch our live stream on Sunday mornings because their congregation was unable to do a live stream. And I know that a good portion of our viewership on Sunday mornings has come from family and friends who are part of congregations who are unable to meet together like we are online. And so really thankful for them. And I know that there are also opportunities that have been coming up with people in the community who are not a part of any church family, but they've suddenly found a way to peep in and to visit inconspicuously and kind of see what's going on. So my prayer for us as a congregation is that we'll continue to seize these opportunities and be wise to the opportunities as they present themselves to us. Let me start off tonight by asking us a question about us. It's a question about us as a group of God's people. Why do you think that anyone would be drawn to be a part of the Forest Mill Church? Why should someone who's not a Christian be drawn towards a group of people who are Christians? One of the keys that church growth studies continuously point out is that for people who are visiting, that one of the keys to making them feel welcomed is letting them know how much we care. Learn their names and smile and shake hands, show a genuine interest, not a feigned interest in them and in their families and their work, in their place in the community, and learning about their lives. Dwight L. Moody, the famous evangelist, he had a really keen memory for names and faces. So if one of his children was missing out of the Sunday school, he knew it, and he would do everything possible to find out why. Hey, by the way, Dwight L. Moody is largely credited with the invention of Sunday school. He's the one who began seeing all these kids out on the streets and wanted to reach out to them, and he started Sunday school. So one day he saw an absentee kid coming down the street, and so he took off after her. She ran down the sidewalk and across the street and through an alley and into a saloon and up the stairs and into the back apartment, into the bedroom, and then she dove underneath the bed, and Moody just went right after her. And just as he was sort of claiming his prize, the mother showed up. Panting from exertion, Moody explained, "Ma'am, I'm Moody." And he said that he had missed the girl and he'd be happy if the family could come back to services. And within a few weeks, he had every child in that family in his school. Now, I am not advocating that we chase children down the streets or track them down into their bedrooms, but I am saying that we need to demonstrate that kind of care and concern for the people that we encounter, for the people that we meet. And until we do, they're going to see very little connection between what's going on within the church body and what's going on out in the world. That those will seem like two separate parts of our lives to them with no connection. So the psalm we're going to be studying tonight goes further back into that little equation, into that process, from how to reach out to community, to what it is that draws them, what draws the world towards God's people. And it's Psalm 67. If you have a Bible there with you and you want to be following along, or you want to read along on BibleGateway.com or one of the apps on your phone, you're welcome to do that. And as we read through this, the connection between what the Psalm says and what we've been talking about, that's not going to be like readily apparent, but I promise we're going to get there, okay? So let's begin by reading just the first two verses of Psalm 67, verses 1 and 2. He begins, "May God be gracious to us and bless us and make his face shine upon us, that your ways may be known on earth, your salvation among all nations." So this psalm opens up with a prayer of blessing, asking for God's blessings on his people. So see where it says us in verse 1, that us would be referring to Israel, who was God's people at this time. And so asking for a blessing from God would be on us, would be on Israel. Now today we would say that God's people are all over the world. They are his children. They are the church of Jesus Christ. But notice how the psalmist isn't asking for God's blessings just so that they can be blessed, right? Or live the high life, or, as we say around here, live high on the hog. That's not the purpose of the blessings. This prayer asks for God to bless Israel so that his ways, or his laws, his commandments, his deeds, and his salvation might be known. And by the way, known is not just like cognizantly known, but to be experienced personally throughout the world. It's a prayer. It's asking for God's blessings. It's a prayer asking for God's blessings on us so that they might know God personally. And all of this prayer was apparently adapted from the high priestly prayer all the way back in Numbers chapter 6, verses 24 through 26. The psalmist changes the name of God. He substitutes a different name of God. He uses the name of God, Elohim, instead of the Jehovah that we see back in Numbers. But it's no doubt taken from this same prayer. And you see back in verse 1 where it says, make his face shine upon us. Now, we sing about that, and we've certainly heard that phrase, but the phrase itself might not make much sense to us today, because it's not referring to the physical face of God. This is a reference to the glory of God. Do you remember when Moses went up on the mountain, Mount Sinai, to meet with God, to receive the 10 Commandments? And it says there that God spoke to him face to face as a friend. Not that God has a physical face like you and I do. He's not limited by a physical body, but there was an encounter there on Mount Sinai that is described as a face-to-face, an intimate meeting. And when Moses came down from that mountain, it says that his face glowed with the glory of God. So God's face is associated with his glory. And Israel at this point has a history with the glory of God. It was God's glory that led them through the wilderness. God's glory that rested on the tabernacle when they camped. So to have the light of God's face shine upon them, that was the height of Israel's blessing. That was God being with them as personally and as intimately as possible. And to lose that glory meant the coming judgment of God. So make your face to shine upon us, for God to make his face shine upon us, would be experiencing this intimate, personal connection with God and the blessings that come from it. So today, in the New Testament, we're told that as Christians, we don't just have this blessing shining upon us, but that God's people today have God's glory within us. 2 Corinthians 4:6 says, "For God, who said, 'Let light shine out of the darkness,' made his light shine out of our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ." When we as Christians live as his people, we live in good works, we live in godly character, we live in loving service to the world, we reveal that glory to the world. In the same way that Israel was called to do, and here that Israel desires to do, that they become a light and a blessing to the nations. Now, continuing down at verse 3, we're going to read verses 3 through 5. "May the peoples praise you, O God. May all the peoples praise you. May the nations be glad and sing for joy. May you rule the peoples justly and guide the nations of the earth. May the peoples praise you, O God. May all the peoples praise you." So I would argue that these three verses here, they're not just the physical center of the psalm, the middle of the psalm. This is the heart of the meaning of this particular psalm. And these verses focus on all the nations, on all the peoples worshiping and praising the God of Israel. You see how the focus has switched here from us to everyone, to all peoples or all nations. And now remember that the word nations is the same word that we would say is Gentiles. It's a reference to everyone else but Israel, right? You've got Israel and then the nations. Everyone else, that's everyone else. Sometimes called the Gentiles when we get into other parts of Scripture. So let's stop and think about that for just a moment. What is this prayer really about? Now, there are different beliefs and interpretations about these particular verses, including some interpretations that really focus on a premillennial doctrine. But let me give you what I think is really going on, and the best interpretation that I can. I think this is a prayer for the coming day when God's people would consist not merely of the house of Israel, but of all the people in all the nations, in all the world, that God's people would be everywhere. A prayer for God's rule to spread over the whole of the earth, or in the words of the prayer of Jesus in the New Testament, "Thy kingdom come." That God's kingdom, his rule, would come to earth and spread across it. I believe that this is a prayer for the establishment of God's kingdom here on earth that we see taking place in the Gospels and on into Acts 2 on the day of Pentecost, that day when God threw open the doors and said people from all over the world or all nations become his people. And as you follow the story through the book of Acts and then into Paul's epistles, you see it's no longer just the house of Israel, but it's people from Samaria, the Samaritans, and people from Ethiopia and people from all over the world becoming God's children. And again, this is open to some interpretation and debate, but it is certainly true that today God's kingdom is all over the world. It's in all nations. So what is the result of that kind of kingdom spread, that kind of blessing being poured out? This finish up by looking at verses 6 and 7 here at the end of the psalm. It says, "Then the land will yield its harvest, and God, our God, will bless us. God will bless us, and all the ends of the earth will fear him. So, what does this harvest have to do with the conversions of the nations, or the conversion of the whole world? The phrase there that's used is, "Then the land will yield its increase." It's another quotation from Leviticus 26, verse 4. And if you go back and look in Leviticus 26, it's a summary of God's covenant with Israel. In that chapter, God makes it clear that his blessing on the land, his blessing the land, would be dependent on Israel's dependence or obedience to his law. Remember, it was the like a triangle. You got the 3 points of the triangle: God, people, land. And God blesses the people and blesses the land. The people take care of the land and obey God. That's all the points of the covenant. So God said he's going to bless the land as long as Israel is obedient to the law. These blessings he would send to Israel would be a witness to all the nations around them that Israel's God was the one true and living God. In other words, God says, I want you in your obedience to be obedient to me, and then I will bless you so much that people will be going, what's the difference here? This is just another hard scrabble attractive land. Why is this land so different than everyone else around them? And it's going to be clear it's because of me, because of your God. Don't you think that would have opened some doors of opportunity to share the good news about Yahweh God when all these other people are passing through Israel? It was kind of a crossroads for that part of the world. And they come through and they see Israel being blessed so much, and they ask, what's the difference here? And they see the differences in the blessing of their God. And when Israel disobeyed, God says, I'm going to withhold the rain. There's going to be no harvest. And it will be partially for you, like for a correction, the same way, your parents might ground you or punish you, or when I was a kid, you got spankings or whatever that would be, right? So it's sort of a correction. And God said, I would withhold the rain. There won't be any harvest. And that would be partly to correct Israel. But it's also to show the rest of the world that God's not blessing that sort of behavior, right? It would kind of shame Israel in front of all these other, pagan nations. So let me sum all this up and paint a little bit of a picture for you. As we obey the Lord and as we trust in him, he provides not only what we need, absolutely have to have, but blessings overflowing. And the world sees that he cares for us. That's the whole purpose of that, is not just for us to enjoy the blessings, but to give us that opportunity to tell the world about our God, to tell them about Jesus. Even though verse 6, by the way, it's talking about a literal harvest here. The fields are not going to produce their grain or their grapes or their olives, whatever they're planted with. So it's talking about a literal harvest here in verse 6. Jesus made that connection with a spiritual harvest of souls in John 4, verses 34 and 35. My food, said Jesus, is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. Do not say 4 more months and then the harvest. I tell you, open your eyes and look at the fields. They are ripe for harvest. So, brothers and sisters, my prayer for you tonight, my prayer for us as a community of God's people, and for Christians throughout our community and all over our world, that we might live in obedience to God and experience the blessing of God, so that we might in turn be a blessing to all the world. May God bless you as you continue this endeavor. Thank you, Forrest Mill.